Okay, let me just do a quick introduction to my reading of The Legends of Vancouver by Pauline Johnson, who Pauline Johnson was this is all a part of my kind of Canadian project of trying to read up on both Canadian literature and Canadian history and how they inform each other, and to kind of educate myself and to have a better understanding of my country. Also, come a clear-eyed look at my country, and not one that is shaped by just sort of the stories, the myths that we tell ourselves about what Canada is, and trying to kind of go beyond that to um, some of the more disturbing and complicated truths that are actually there. Um, yeah. So I decided I would, I'm looking on Project Gutenberg for stuff that's the older stuff of Canadian literature. And I mean, you don't actually Canadian literature doesn't go back that far as a kind of emerging as distinctly Canadian. So I decided to do this work, which is a 1911 work, the Legends of Vancouver by Pauline Johnson. That's Emily Pauline Johnson, who was born in 1861 and died in 1913. And indeed, the edition that I read is a posthumous edition, which talks of her dying. She was also known by her Mohawk stage name, which is Dege Owage, which literally means double life. She was a Canadian poet, author, and performer who was popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Her father was a hereditary Mohawk chief of mixed ancestry, and her mother was an English immigrant. So yeah, she was born on the Six Nations Reserve in Ontario, and died at the age of 51 in Vancouver, British Columbia. And I think I know from this thing that she died of breast cancer at that time. So she's one of these interesting figures, because I think on a surface read she seems to kind of conform to the idea of what you find in a lot of early kind of 19th century thing, which is the vanishing native, and they don't use the word native, but that idea of like, oh, it's dying out, it's vanishing, it's gone, because I'm speaking from a Canadian perspective. That was the policy, was that we're going to kill the Indian. We have on September the 30th, we have had our first Truth and Reconciliation Day, a national holiday, also a holiday here in British Columbia, to reflect upon the horrible damage done to Native peoples by our policies of the residential schools, which is only one mechanism there. There's a couple of mechanisms going on there. There's the reservations, broken treaty promises that were all designed to extinguish, to exterminate, to kill off Native peoples. And this whole idea of the romantic vanishing Indian is the romantic gussied up version of that, of like, oh, they're disappearing for just, they're dying out because they're just not made for the modern era. It's like, no, they're being purposely crushed by the Canadian state and policies and the people in Canada to benefit for our benefit, so that we can exploit the Canadian government can exploit the resources, not because of romantic misty reasons. And I think Pauline Johnson, at least the image I have of her, is of a part of the kind of the romantic native, and that idea that seems to be, looking through kind of the Wikipedia article, this is as far as I've gotten so far, seems to be like Pauline Johnson was probably subtly working against that. She was definitely using stuff like kind of class and kind of being patrician, and leaning on romantic tropes, like romantic as in English romantic tropes, to be able to kind of subtly put in her messages about being a female in society at this time, a variety of things. So this particular work is the legends, which were with as she says in her foreword, with two or three exceptions, were told to me personally by my honored friend, the late Chief Joe Capilano of Vancouver, who actually I need to look up and do research on. Capilano is, I know the Capilano Bridge. I know vaguely of Chief Joe Capilano, but I need to do some more kind of research on that. So in some ways, this is a work by Pauline Johnson, but these are works. This is also stuff that has been told to her by Joe Capilano. So maybe it's a double authorship here where we only are listed with the one. I mean, it depends on how much credit. I mean, credit to Pauline Johnson at the very first thing she says in her foreword. That is the first thing she says. This was told to me by the late Chief Joe Capilano of Vancouver, who she had the privilege of first meeting in London in 1906 when he visited England and was received at Buckingham Palace by their Majesties King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra, which is probably a story in itself. But also, that is also Pauline Johnson. This is who I am, elevating myself up here. So yeah, it's there is this complicated thing of, I mean, she has documented Native heritage. I think in the Wikipedia thing, it says that she didn't maybe actually culturally hang out, wasn't like a part of the Native community. So she's still maybe slightly outside of that, looking in as a as kind of a pair of and pulling that veneer of white romantic ideas about Native people over top. It will be interesting to see. You have to say, I have to accept that, especially with early Canadian literature, I'll have to dig around for actually getting purely native voices, culturally native voices. There's always that thing of like, oh, I'm 1/17th Cherokee or something, like, you often hear of someone saying, and that for somehow that little bit of genetics of somehow gives that person an insight into something, even though they've maybe lived their entire life as a white person, all the privileges, all the inculcated into completely white culture, versus someone who is maybe Métis, who is culturally lived, who's grown up in that kind of a native community. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. I'm going to not know what the fuck I'm talking about, which is a part of this. This is what I want to kind of record my little impressions at the beginning, because I've got no fucking idea. And that's the joy of this project, and also the reason I need to do this project. It's nice that I picked this one because I'm not that much into poetry, and Pauline Johnson's poetry sounds like it's very much kind of the late 19th century, early 20th century kind of sucky romantic poet carbon copy stuff, which I would have to dig. I might have to try it, but I'll see as I go along. I might find some little snippets, read a couple of poems, and just sort of see if I can work with them. And I oftentimes, like, I'll read one poem and I'll kind of deconstruct that, or but read and actually try and pay attention to that. Whereas if I just read a whole big collection, it just water off a dumb duck's back. So yeah, that's my introduction to Legends of Vancouver by E. Pauline Johnson. With her Mohawk stage name. So I don't, that's you've already got one layer here of the romantic native with that name. It's like, is that just a name that you give out for white audiences to consume? That, oh, this is a native lady. Oh, how romantic, kind of thing. And I am going to say native. I'm not going to say the I word, because Indians come from India. And then you punch the guy. That is a reference to Empire of the Wild by Sherry Demeline. Yeah, and so I will leave it there. All right, more videos later.